Okay, so I seem to have gotten myself into a debate on Twitter, which I hate doing because I don't like debating on Twitter, because Twitter is a cesspool of takes and it just invites a lot of unnecessary attention, which I really don't like in the first place. I'll say this. So of course I'm perusing on Twitter, right? Let's just get into it because there's so many things I want to talk about here. I'm just perusing on Twitter and somebody had said Kuzan over Luffy. Unless Luffy fixes that stamina issue in Gear 5, he loses to most top tiers right now, which I don't think is a terrible take. It is based on how you look at things and how you look at base Luffy in general or Luffy's other gears. I don't think I necessarily agree with that, just considering just how powerful Luffy is in other gears and how powerful Gear 5 is, where even against top tiers, he can overwhelm them pretty quickly. But I understand the take. Someone then quote tweeted and said, y'all think Luffy can't box without Gear 5 just because of Kizaru. And they showed Luffy boxing against Kaido in base. Then the conversation became about how strong Luffy is in base form in comparison to the other top tiers. What's up, One Piece crew? It's your boy B.D.A, and I've got something exciting to share with you today. Thanks to our awesome sponsor, HelloFresh, mealtime just got a whole lot better. So let's dive right in. Now, you know I love my food, and HelloFresh's recipes are absolutely delicious. With 40 recipes and over 100 seasonal and convenience items to choose from each week, they keep my taste buds on their toes. From mouth-watering pineapple chicken tacos to flavorful falafel power bowls. But it's not just about the taste. No, HelloFresh takes the hassle out of mealtime by delivering pre-portioned ingredients and easy to prepare recipes right to your door. No more endless supermarket runs or checkout lines, especially now in certain places where they have a no bag policy where you have to bring your own bag. I mean, come on. With HelloFresh, you can spend more time enjoying your summer. And here's something awesome. This time of year, everyone's looking to revamp their eating habits and start the year on the right track. HelloFresh is there to be your partner for a wholesome 2024 with health-forward options like Calorie Smart and Protein Smart recipes. So guys, use my code BDAJUL10 and receive 10 free meals plus free appetizers for life. One appetizer item per box while subscription is active. If you're in the US, the link and code are valid in all countries and a respective local discount will apply. I then reluctantly, albeit, got involved by saying Kaido was matching energy all fight. That's all. Base Luffy gets folded every single time. And then the quotes. And then the mentions, which didn't read all of them. I just kind of muted the conversation and went away. It's kind of like I just set a bomb off and just let it explode and just see people going crazy. However, I did see some of the takes, not addressing any specific takes right now, but I think it's a larger conversation about base Luffy in comparison to other characters. But that wasn't even the most controversial thing that apparently I said, because after that, somebody said base Luffy will fold Kuzan. Then I kind of tripled down and I said, base Luffy's not even folding Zoro. Yeah, I went there. I went there. So what does that mean? What does that statement mean? First off, base Luffy not folding Zoro. First off, we got to look at folding. Folding indicates thrashing, dominating, low diffing. That's what folding is. Folding isn't beating. Folding is dominating, whereas this person has no chance, right? That's how I interpret folding, or that's how I use folding. Maybe people could use it in different ways, but if I say you're going to get folded, you're going to get dominated, right? So me saying base Luffy not folding Zoro, some people look at it as, well, base Luffy is not beating Zoro. Now, the conversation for me is not base Luffy beating Zoro, even though I don't think base Luffy beats Zoro. I don't think base Luffy dominates Zoro, right? I think all things being equal, base Luffy should be monstrous. However, base Luffy is flawed because Luffy himself is flawed as a fighter, where Luffy is an incremental fighter, meaning he's not going to go all out from the rip. He's going to incrementally build himself up until he has to try a bit harder. So he's going to get caught and he's going to get knocked down by things that probably shouldn't do it. But because of how Luffy grows incrementally, and that's how he fights, typically he's going to get got early and often until he ultimately adapts because of his insane stamina and his unrelenting resolve. That's who Luffy is as a fighter. He's labeled a genius, but I think for the most part, Luffy just hangs around long enough to figure shit out, right? But let's address a few things. Base Luffy. What is he? Now, there are different forms and levels of Luffy, depending on where you start from, right? If you go to Whole Cake, you go to the beginning of Wano, you go to Onigashima, you go to after fighting Kaido. These are different levels of Luffy, right? But ultimately, base Luffy is not as dominant as you would want him to be, because narratively, he can't be. Base Luffy should be top 10 just in base, based on everything Luffy has. Future Sight, Conquerors, Advanced Conquerors, Ryo, even just overwhelming strength and speed in base Luffy should be top 10. However, base Luffy again has that incremental growth thing where in general, he doesn't take things as serious, where sometimes he does use certain techniques, and you have to sometimes start to hypothesize and theorize, why isn't Luffy using certain things? One thing is like Advanced Conquerors, but why isn't Luffy always using Advanced Conquerors? Well, one, it clearly drains him, right? It's something that drains you, where like if you spam it, it's gonna drain you even further, and the last thing Luffy needs to do is be drained of stamina, considering what Gear 5 turns him into, even in Gear 4th. So I think Luffy's cognizant of that, so he tries to do different things like Red Hawk, like Elephant Gun, like he tries to compensate by saving his energy in base, because he understands a base ACOG attack is not going to hit as hard as a Advanced Conqueror's Haki attack in Gear 5, right? Which Gear 5 seemingly brings out Advanced Conqueror's Haki in general, right? Kaido described Gear 5, not saying it's automatic, but Luffy was using Advanced Conquerors in Gear 5 seamlessly, right? So you have to factor that in when we talk about base Luffy. But something that you cannot think about is base Luffy in general in a ton of his matchups, right? People look at base Luffy versus Kaido and they're like, look at what base Luffy can do. But you got to think about the Kaido that he was fighting, the things that Kaido had been through before that, and then Kaido's mindset. Kaido dominated base Luffy several times, even after unlocking Advanced Conquerors, where he acknowledged Luffy, right? Where Luffy had gotten to his level, but 10 times out of 10, 100 times out of 100, base Luffy is losing to Kaido. Luffy literally needed to die, right? To die to have a chance at beating Kaido. And even after going to Gear 5, Kaido knocked him out of that. The reason why Kaido lost to Luffy was because of Kaido's own pride and him just wanting to take straight up Bazran Gun. But Kaido, even after Luffy started flexing on him, said, yo, what are you doing? Like, stop playing with me. And then proceeded to whoop his ass, right? And then Luffy went in and Bazran Gun and all the different stuff. But at the end of the day, base Luffy, yeah, he can hang. It's cool. It's some back and forth. But don't forget, Kaido threw Luffy off and was like, yo, I guess he couldn't be Joy Boy either. He did so many different things to indicate that, yo, this kid is not on my level. But you have to acknowledge that base Luffy did grow versus Kaido. But here's why I say base Luffy will never be a top tier, or rather, the top tiers, he will never beat them, considering, one, narratively what it means. Oda is a genius writer, genius mangaka that understands progression, and he understands importance in certain moments and certain transformations. And so there are moments where we feel like base Luffy should be able to handle this. However, narratively, it's more impactful if Luffy transforms, i.e. versus Rob Lucci. I would think base Luffy should be able to handle Rob Lucci, but Luffy felt the need to transform, which tells me, again, this isn't about how strong base Luffy is, but it's all about how flawed Luffy is as a fighter, where if I start using a lot of Advanced Conqueror's Haki attacks in base, how much does it limit Gear 5, Gear 4th, any other transformations where I have a stronger transformation? In base, I'm not gonna knock you out, so why not just go for the kill shot, transforming and using the same attacks? I think theoretically, base Luffy should be top 10, in theory. However, narratively, that's gonna always be priority. So for instance, versus Kaido, base Luffy versus Kaido was just a cool moment versus two brawlers enjoying the fight. And you see the pure nature of that with Luffy in base and Kaido in base. So Oda drew that to show just the carnage that these two have without even transforming or being in a different form, etc. There are moments where Kaido was in hybrid, etc. But just at their base, they can brawl against each other, right? That's the matchup. However, the reason why some of these different forms exist is to have more importance and also to pull the audience in. These transformations lose importance if Luffy can just dominate everybody in base. Then it's like, why do we need Gear 4th? Why do we need Gear 5? For instance, Luffy versus Kizaru. If Luffy had dominated Kizaru in base and overwhelmed him like he did in Gear 5, which context is needed based on everything that happened, But if he did that in base, Gear 5 would then start to lose some luster versus Blackbeard versus, I don't know who else Luffy expects to fight, but let's say he fights against Emu and he's dominating Emu in base. Gear 5 then starts to lose its significance. In Gear 5, Oda is seemingly building it up as a war cry, as the ultimate form to bring everyone together. And so Oda has to continuously build up Gear 5 as this, not only this character, but this figure that unites everyone. And so he can't have Gear 5 be undermined by how strong Luffy is in base. Gear 4th as well. So I think in our minds, base Luffy is stronger than he's shown on paper. 1000%. I agree with that. But based on how things have played out, base Luffy is not as impressive as one would think based on his accomplishments. Base Luffy, even after training with Hyoguro, hadn't unlocked ACOG yet. Him versus Ulti said, hey, I may need to go Gear 4th, right? Granted, Luffy has gotten stronger since then, unlocked Advanced Conquerors, etc. But he thought about going Gear 4th against Ulti, which, in my opinion, doesn't hold a candle to someone like Zoro. Like, I think Zoro, it's not even close because, again, Luffy and Zoro, they handle their fights differently. They don't go into their fights with the same mindset. So Ulti versus Zoro, it's a completely different game. Here's the thing. Do you think Zoro can make base Luffy question whether he needs Gear 4th or not? Granted, he has ACOG. Granted, he has gotten stronger, but so has Zoro. Zoro has gotten much stronger with Enma. Zoro has unlocked Advanced Conquerors. He has Conquerors himself, where Luffy beating Zoro in base theoretically could happen based on the abilities that Luffy has. But I think if they actually fought in a narrative, Luffy would definitely need Gear 4th. And I think Zoro could possibly push him to Gear 5, considering the type of fighter Zoro is and then Luffy's weakness. Yeah, I know that's going to trigger some people because Luffy technically doesn't have a weakness to swords more than anybody else. Swords are just more effective. So Zoro having the things that's probably most effective against Luffy, having Advanced Conquerors himself, and I think more than anything, you can't underestimate Zoro's potency and capability of destruction, considering what someone like Big Mom had to tell Kaido in regards to a slash from his blade. So off of that, Luffy in general, right? In general, would have to take Zoro seriously. And if you want to look at two different fights, but how they were handled, where Luffy, right? He used Gear 5 to dominate Rob Lucci. And then we saw Zoro, who basically took down Rob Lucci as well, which I wouldn't even say was a difficult fight. I would say it was all right. Like, Rob Lucci did well, right? But ultimately when Zoro wanted to end the fight, he did. Not saying this is a great indicator of the distance between Luffy and Zoro, but I think in general, it is somewhat disrespectful to someone like Zoro to think that Luffy in his base form would defeat him. Now, this may be Zoro Glaze, but I look at Zoro as one of the upper echelon right-hand men. And in regards to the upper echelon right-hand men, it's a different level of respect that comes with them. There aren't many of them, right? Katakuri isn't even upper echelon in comparison to Big Mom because it's a great gap. I think Whitebeard and Marco is a great gap. Kaido and King is a great gap. When you get to someone like Rayleigh and Roger, what is the gap? I think there's a gap, but I don't think Roger's low diffing Ray, right? And I think when we go to someone like, where it's not necessarily about the right hand, but about the partners, right? Rayleigh is Roger's partner. Zoro is Luffy's partner. Ben Beckman is Shanks' partner, right? So these different individuals, I don't think they're getting dominated the way some of these other right hands would, where the separation between the right hands and the captains, it varies. It's no set in stone motion like for Killer and Kid. There's a gap, but it's not as easy a fight, even between Kid and Killer. There are moments on the rooftop where some people were like, I don't know, I might have Killer over Kid, which is crazy, but people just hate Kid, so, I get it. But ultimately, I think base Luffy is a powerhouse theoretically based on the abilities he has. Luffy is very inefficient with Future Sight, right? Because he doesn't use it as frequently as someone like Katakuri, even seemingly like Kaido. Luffy has to be forced to use Future Sight. It's not something he actively incorporates into his fighting style. Like, if Luffy uses Future Sight more effectively, base Luffy's stronger, right? Advanced Conquerors. Luffy, I think, worries about stamina a little bit. It's not something that's specified as much in the narrative, but Luffy and stamina is clearly an issue in the narrative. So for Advanced Conquerors, even maybe Future Sight, and observation hockey, we know you can run out of it, or it can get weaker over time. That's something that you have to wonder, is Luffy cognizant and being a bit more conservative in base because it's like a vibe check. That's how he uses base form. But for us, when we see base Luffy, how strong he's gotten, how strong he was beforehand, it's like, Luffy, you should be dominating admirals in base. But then Luffy couldn't even dominate an admiral in gear 4th, right? Like he couldn't even do that. And so it starts to make you question, okay, how strong is base Luffy? Or is it how strong is Luffy, how strong the admirals are? Now, I'm not saying the Zoro's as strong as the admirals, but I think he's pretty damn close. I don't think it's far off in regards to Zoro fighting against an admiral on equal footing, where it's probably to the point of once he masters Enma, he's there. And so to say that base dominates and folds him when Luffy couldn't even do that to Kizaru, Gear 4th couldn't do that to Kizaru, and Gear 5th was necessary in a way that I don't even know if we can consider Luffy versus Kizaru a fight because of just the nature of that exchange. But all those forms were necessary. Without Gear 5, Luffy does not beat Kizaru. Point blank, period. And so at the end of the day, we can theorize how strong these characters are based on the abilities they have, but you have to factor in fighting styles, advantages, disadvantages. And I think Luffy versus Zoro would, at worst, be pushed to Gear 4th. Once Luffy goes Gear 5, all bets are off. I don't think Zoro stands a chance versus Gear 5. Base? Are you kidding me? That's enough. Now, at some point, we can talk about the gap between the right hands, but I'm gonna be honest. Until we get Ben Beckman, get some more on Rayleigh and Roger, there's not enough to speculate. Only thing we can say is that, well, they're closer than the other right hands because they're partners. We're just not sure how close. Like if I asked you right now, if Roger's 100, most people would give Rayleigh 90, at worst 92. For Zoro, if Luffy's 100, I might give him like an 88, something like that. But give me your thoughts, guys. What do you think? How does base Luffy fare against Zoro? How does base Luffy stack up theoretically versus what actually happens, how it plays out typically with base, where I think Oda preserves Luffy on purpose, considering the other forms and the importance of it for the narrative. And, you know, for power scaling people or narrative people, you always say narrative trumps power scaling. So now we got to keep the same energy. In a narrative, base Luffy is fine, but he has to be held back considering the other forms. But yeah, give me your thoughts. Let me know. Like, subscribe, all that. Catch you next one. Peace.